advantage versus someone who doesn't. I'm the only person at the CPUC that's authorized to discuss this. So if you email someone else, regarding this solicitation, of course you can work with people on their other things. But, if you email someone, best case, they bounce it to me. Worst case, you don't want to get yourself in a conflicted or the appearance of being advantaged or not. So just direct any questions to me in writing. And I think, then the last point is that thing on the bottom. We don't play matchmaker as far as subs and primes, but there is a facility built into Cal eProcure, the website. That little picture at the bottom, view vendor ads, is in the bottom left-hand corner of the Cal eProcure posting. And that's a thing built into it where you can post an ad or look at ads that others have posted for signs so that primes can find subs and vice versa. So that's the point of that functionality. And I believe that covers this slide. So again, mentioning the intent to bid, this is a requirement for submitting a bid. If you submit a bid without this, it will not pass go or collect $200. But at the same time, it's not binding in the sense that you can submit the bid, intent to bid, and not actually bid. So it's sort of an early warning system for us to know if there's enough interest to go forward or if we need to abort. Or, yeah. So before Christmas, December 20th, and another potential use for this is you can say you intend to bid and say, no, I don't intend to bid, but that alerts us to keep you on our email list because I don't like to spam everyone with, long email lists of people about this. And if you contacted us with a Q&A or this sort of intent to bid, I'll be sure to keep anyone on our list of future emails regarding this RFP. So yeah, that's the purpose of this. And next slide, we've got the minimum qualifications. This is a brief summary of the qualifications. So check these boxes if you want your bid to be considered. And one of them, the first one that has changed is there was a COI component of having worked for some of the utilities. That's actually changed. It's just now you have to be available to work. Again, number two, you have to have headquarters or some other office. You have to have some footprint in California for it to, I guess, be practical to do California work. Number three actually spills over to the next page, but in brief, you have to meet the minimum requirements regarding experience and certifications, and it's listed in the RFP, and this is paraphrasing the RFP. The RFP is the ultimate authority, so nothing we say is binding. This is just sort of summarizing and reiterating that material. But you have to have the minimum licenses that it specified, so you can see those there. Have to be able to work statewide, coordinate with utilities, the crews, and CPU staff. This is not easy work. They have to be able to work outdoors in dusty, dirty, hot, cold, rain, wind, snow, sleet of hail, dark of night, etc., except they're not delivering mail. Be able to drive. I think I mentioned the weather, road. Next slide. Meet the minimum licensing certification requirements. Now, one thing is make sure it's California certifications, California licenses. I think that's required. And you actually have to provide a copy of those in the bid. So make sure you've got the right licenses and that you're providing evidence that they're there. Able to work overtime, have the ability to provide the number of people that you say you will, and can manage time and resources. Also, next one is that
Stevenson.
You've read and understand the COI. There's a certification in there that you need to fill out. Be registered as one of these types of entities. List all the, identify all the subcontractors, what their status is, how much work they would do. Attachment 5 of the bidder declaration, just that is a key thing to fill out. There's subcontracting limitation that if you're the prime on one You can't be the sub on another. You can sub for as many of them as you want, but you can't be have someone be A on one and B on the other and vice versa. Confidentiality and non-disclosure statement. Again, back to our intent to bid, so that is covered here as well. Have the State of California Professionals Engineers Act. So those are requirements, and then make sure that you've checked all the boxes on the checklist. So those are the minimum requirements.
Great, and since we didn't have the recording going when I kicked this off, and in support of level playing field for those that review the recording, can we go back to the original slides? And I'm just going to review those pretty quickly since it only took me a couple minutes. Yeah, we'll start there. So this is more about procedure for those that are actually in the room, so I don't think we need to go into the details on that one again. But for those that review the recording, just to call out again, as Michael mentioned, verbal responses are preliminary in nature. It's only the written responses that are final. Go to the next slide, please. And in the background on establishing the Wildfire Safety Division, Senate Bill 901, Assembly Bill 111, and Assembly Bill 1054. As I mentioned before, the first time this RFP went out, Wildfire Safety Division hadn't been up and running, but we are now. So we did adjust some of the terminology in the RFP to account for that. Again, the high fire threat map, the core of the work is to be done in these areas, so we want to make sure that all bidders are familiar with the California high fire threat map and the areas that means that the work would be performed in. And again, the tasks are the same as the original RFP that went out earlier this year. We did not fundamentally change the scope of work, some slight adjustments. The key area that we did change was the conflict of interest. So again, just to recap for the recording, and if now we can jump ahead.
ArborWorks
has joined the meeting.
All right, so let's get into a little bit more detail on the tasks. So the first task, I think this is a pretty standard one that people are probably pretty familiar with. This is about the project team's management and quality control and having all of the organizational and staff and processes in place to manage a large, complex project with proper protocols and procedures. So we're looking for someone to be able to demonstrate that they have that capability. Task 2, facility risk assessment and inspection prioritization. So for those of you that are familiar with the wildfire mitigation plans, you're probably familiar that last year was the first time that we had wildfire mitigation plans submitted by the IOUs. So this year they're going to be submitting again in 2020. We're sort of maturing the evaluation process for that, if you will. There's a whole bunch of proceedings that are happening around that. The key will be this time around that there is going to be a compliance assurance process that they're actually executing on the things that they say that they're doing in those wildfire mitigation plans. So since this is a new program that's being stood up, a new line of effort, if you will, we need to develop, and we're looking for the contractor to work with us on developing the actual compliance requirements that would be used to conduct the audits and field inspections for the compliance assurance work. So one of the steps in that would also be prioritizing how those inspections are conducted, right? Because at the end of the day, you know, we probably can't do everything, so we have to decide what are the priority areas that we're focusing on and doing a proper risk analysis on those efforts, the different mitigation efforts, and then prioritizing the audit inspections for that. So that's what that task is really about. Task 3 and 4 really comes down to the meat of it, if you will. That's the records review, compliance, auditing, as well as the field inspections to confirm that they're actually doing the work that they're calling out and meeting the intended outcomes of the wildfire mitigation efforts that are underway. So again, this is about demonstrating your ability to actually conduct the work and the process and staffing and workforce that you would have to do that. One of the key areas in this is, and we bring it up again in Task 5, but I want to call it out here because especially on Task 4, it is of critical importance to us that all of the safety, all of the proper safety training and certifications and knowledge is demonstrated in the bid for us to be able to fully understand that you have that capability. This is obviously in some areas extremely dangerous work, and we want to make sure that all of the proper procedures and protocols are in place to be able to execute it in a safe manner. Task 5, reporting and issue resolution. So obviously, as we do audit and inspection compliance type work, sometimes things fall out that there's issues. And so we need to develop a process for being able to articulate those violations or whatever we want to call them, and reporting those issues back to the CPUC and then processing the resolution to them. One thing I'll call out so that you guys are clear on it, the first RFP was done under the Safety Enforcement Division. This RFP is done under the Wildfire Safety Division. The Wildfire Safety Division and the Safety Enforcement Division at the PUC, the way our relationship is being built is the Wildfire Safety Division is doing the auditing and inspection, but the enforcement still lives with Safety Enforcement Division. So there will be processes set up in place to be able to sort of kick over any sort of follow-on investigation or enforcement actions that need to take place through our the CPUC's standard safety enforcement processes. The ongoing assessment, actually I'll stick on reporting. The other thing that you may see in the RFP, one area that we did flesh out a little bit more in the scope of work this time around is the processes for sharing information during and at the end of the contract. So since the Wildfire Safety Division is a brand new division and we get to sort of build it the right way the first time, the idea is we want to do this in a modern 21st century way, right? We don't want to rely on the old-fashioned just fill out paper and then it gets shoved in a file somewhere and then it's PDF and you can never really access it. We want the processes to be built on modern 21st century technology where we can in real time collect information, analyze information, share information. So you'll see in the RFP that it calls out, being able to share information via web services, using GIS location-based systems. So we're looking for the bidder to be able to articulate how they're going to be able to do this in a modern way so that we're building it right the first time and not having old legacy systems that we have to try and convert. So when it goes to the logging, tracking, reporting, and potential violations, that's an important piece of that. Ongoing status assessment, analysis, and project completion. So this is sort of the follow-on from task 1, really, in terms of being able to clearly and in an organized way articulate how the project is going. The bid is for ultimately a 3-year project. So we want to be able to have a clear process for doing assessments of the progress, status reporting, also trend analysis so that we can be learning as we're doing this, right? We want to be able to see what's working, what's not working, and make adjustments to be able both to the processes that we're doing, the requirements, the information requirements that we're setting. We know that this being, again, a sort of a new process for both the utilities and for the CPUC, we want to make sure that we have built into the system, if you will, the ability to learn on the fly and make adjustments so that we can be doing business smarter and better to ultimately affect the outcomes that we're trying to do, which at the end of the day is to mitigate wildfires and save people's lives and save property in the environment. So sorry, let me just follow on one last thing. Documentation experience. So we still are a regulatory agency that requires lots of documentation so that we can clearly articulate what happened. So we are looking for that expertise as well and being able to clearly document all process, procedures, protocols, and information collected so that there is a historical record and a clear process to maintain that historical record, especially when it comes to communications in the effort. So again, we'll take questions at the end, but hopefully that gave you at least a little bit more detail on what we're looking for in each of those areas. Okay, back to Michael.
Thank you. Okay, so next we're talking about the cost sheet and the scoring process. We'll start out with the cost sheet. So this contract has a cost cap of $15 million. And so the total evaluation, the total cost of the contract can't exceed that. And there's actually 2 costs. there's the evaluation cost, which is what is plugged into calculated on the cost sheet, and then there's what the actual contract will eventually be signed for. The two, both are subject to the $50 million cost cap. The way they're different ties into the unit cost is when you submit your bid on the cost sheet, those amounts are fixed. So the cost per unit, be it the unit is per hour for the hourly, or if it's the deliverable section, it may be for a given unit deliverable. But the number of units may change slightly. So we may end up being more or fewer hours, or more or fewer, say, reports or meetings or work plans. That may vary slightly, but the end result will be $15 million, whatever we end up contracting for will be under $15 million, and the evaluation cost based on our provided unit estimate also has to be can't exceed $15 million. So basically, on apples to apples, we provide a estimated number of units. For the deliverables, we have an estimated number of hours, and that the spreadsheet is all set up to calculate based on that, and whatever numbers you plug in to come up with the evaluation costs are bound by that. And then once that proposal is submitted, those costs are fixed.
Has left the meeting.
So I think that covers the cost evaluation and number of units. Regarding the 4 tabs on the cost sheet, team members, that lists who would be coming to the team, their title, their category, and their areas of expertise. The category ties in with the hourly rates tab, where we give a description of what the different classifications are, and that's where you would plug in the hourly rate for that given category. And also, we have our estimate of how many hours in, and again, that estimate for hours is used in calculating the evaluation cost. It may change slightly one way or the other for when the contract is finally signed, but it may very well not. The next tab is deliverables. Again, there's a section, C through L, those cells are just for estimation. They're optional, but we encourage you to fill them out for planning purposes, so there's a sort of a sanity check on the pricing. And the actual cost per unit in column N is all that's actually required for evaluation. And again, the other cells are for evaluating, for generating the evaluation cost, which is what will be weighed when it comes to the evaluation section and assigning points based on how expensive the bid is. And that, here it says commission defined, that's actually equates to, in the cost sheet, that's called the deliverables tab, so a little bit of a mix-up bit there. And then all of those, the team members, the hourly rates, and the deliverables tabs all flow through to the final tab, the total contract cost. Those are all, the prices you give are multiplied by our default quantities to come up with the final evaluation cost, which is calculated in the total contract cost tab. And there's also a check. You have to make sure you enter in the amounts for all the subcontractors, because especially for the DVBE, the Disabled Veterans Businesses, we need to make sure that those amounts are known and that they meet the required and desired thresholds for assigning any incentive points and meeting our reporting requirements. So that information has to be required, is required and has to be given. So there's a spot in there on the total contract cost for that to be filled in, and it will check and make sure that all the numbers add up. There's a message for that. And see, subject to the 15 million cost cap. Okay, and I think the next slide. So once the cost sheet is filled in and the bid is in, we go through the review. Actually, prior to this, we do the compliance check. So that's where we go through the earlier stages and make sure all the checklists are done and all the required, that there's a bidder intent to bid that we've received and, all those requirements are met. Assuming that is all in order and it passes the compliance check, it goes into stage 1, technical review. That's where the CPUC employees that are selected as evaluators come together, read through all the reviews, read through all the proposals, come together and then discuss and assess these proposals based on the evaluation criteria that are included in the RFP. This section is worth 450 points, but proposals have to get a minimum of 340 points to move to any of the subsequent stages. We can, at least for the reference check, sometimes for efficiency's sake, we will conduct the references checks in parallel with stage 1, but that doesn't necessarily mean, just because the references have been checked does not actually mean it has passed stage 1. If it doesn't pass stage 1, if it doesn't meet that threshold, then regardless of if the references have been checked or not, it doesn't get scored on the following stages. So, yeah, stage 1, basically we weigh the proposals against the evaluation criteria that are listed. Assuming you get 341 points or more, or 340 points or more, whatever responses we get to your references will be weighed. We need at least one, but if you have fewer than those, one for the prime proposer. We had that issue come up before where there weren't references in regards to the prime proposer. They were all subs, and that's not, unfortunately, that's not acceptable. So if you read the requirements for that closely, it's all laid out there. But assuming that you have all your references, you can get up to 40 points out of that. That moves on to the stage 3, where you've got the bidder interviews. So we'll contact you ahead of time, schedule a interview. Hopefully it'll be on schedule and within the time frame given. It might fall behind, hopefully not. 60-minute interview, the criteria are given in the RFP as well. Basically, you make a presentation on about 2 of the deliverables in the work plan. So once those are concluded, that's when we look at the numbers. So basically, based on the evaluated cost, given that we discussed in the cost sheet just earlier, these 410 points are up for grabs. The lowest bid gets all 410 points. Then all the subsequent incrementally higher bids get proportionally fewer points. The calculations and the method of that calculation, the points are calculated by, is given in the RFP. It's pretty straightforward. After the cost points are evaluated, we adjust based on your SB and DVB participation. So if you are a small business or if you have 25% of your business contracted out to small businesses, that's up to 5% points available. Again, with DVBE, that's also potentially 5% points as well, based on, I think it's 1% per percent of business contracted out, up to 5% for DVBEs. In a nutshell, it's slightly more complicated. One is based on the highest total score, and the other is based on the highest awarded. But those details are hashed out in the RFP. It's all there. If it's not clear, you can submit a question. But stage 6, add. And that is it for the scoring process. And that brings us well ahead of schedule to the Q&A.
So we are welcome to take your questions.
Start out with anyone in the room.
What are the conflicts of interest that you find? If you can address those from the prior.
Sure, and I'll sort of recap it. I don't necessarily have the edits of the exact words that were changed, but and Michael and Tony Knoll's also on the phone, who was involved in both. I wasn't involved in the first one, so at a high level, the main thing that changed was the last RFP said that the conflict of interest, you couldn't have done work with the utilities. This one, we recognize that people that are in this space are probably already doing work with the utilities or at least have done work in the past. So what we need from you guys is a clear articulation of how you're sort of going to firewall off those two different activities so that we can trust that the work that you're doing for us is not influenced by the work that you're doing for them. So really it's about recognizing that at the end of the day, the workforce is still a finite resource, but we do need to have confidence, and we will, as part of the evaluation, be sort of evaluating the level of detail and articulation of how that the separation of that work and work effort and workforce will be maintained so that we can have confidence in not having conflict of interest efforts on the contract. Tony, anything to add on that change? I know because you were a bit more involved in that.
No, that's about it. That was the big thing last time, was it was a very kind of restricted conflict of interest.
Sorry, it's a little hard to hear you, Tony. Can you speak up or maybe just get a little closer to the speaker?
Sorry, I'll try it.
There you go.
Yeah, that's a good recap. The last time the conflict of interest was more restrictive. If I remember right, you couldn't have done any work with any of the three big utilities within the last year or two. And as you said, it was a finite resource. So the modification is just to be able to have the bidders show how they're going to show that they can keep those separation of interests.
All right.
Is the change of conflict of interest one of the primary reasons why the RFP was reissued, or was it more related to creating a new division? I'm just curious, did you not get enough intent to bids previously?
We got intent to bids, but the previous RFP was not awarded. So since it wasn't awarded, we had to do it again. Our impression was that the conflict of interest was one of the primary reasons that ultimately didn't succeed. So that was the key area we modified.
If you have a bidder that does not have a conflict of interest that would meet the pass criteria, is it your intent to look at them from a different perspective?
I guess the way I would look at that is we will be evaluating all of the conflict of interest configurations, if you will. So it'll be evaluated against the same criteria that the other bidders' conflict of interest approaches would be evaluated against.
Okay, thank you.
Do we want to go back to the tasks slide if that's, can't see the cells or spreadsheet.
Well, there was no cells or spreadsheet.
Yeah, it's just the PowerPoint.
Yeah, you pull up the spreadsheet and sorry for that.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
Would it help if a conflicted prime contractor retains non-conflicted subs? Would that work in their favor?
Didn't hear your last word. So yeah, I think the question, let me recap it and tell me if I got it right for everyone's benefit. The question is, would it be advantageous if the prime contractor was it the prime contractor that didn't have the conflict or the sub?
The subs.
Okay, so the prime might have let's say relationships, but the sub has no conflict of interest. Let's say it's like fully separated. That's the question is that an advantage?
That's the question.
So again, I would say that all of the configurations of how conflict of interest is being managed would be taken into consideration per the evaluation criteria. I can't say now, like ahead of time, you know, exactly which configurations are better than other configurations, but all of them will be evaluated against the same criteria with our intent to, you know, obviously have confidence and minimize concern regarding conflict of interest. We see a chat question that says, who is responsible for building the database sharing platforms, the CPUC or the bidder? So that's a really good question. I think that it's going to ultimately be a shared responsibility, right? Because the bidder would need to have some capability on their side to share the data. We are building capability within the CPUC to receive that data. And just to be specific, I would imagine that a lot of this is going to be GIS-based. So we are working towards building out a GIS enterprise environment for us to be able to receive data. But again, we're open to other proposals, right? So if there, let's say a bidder had a sharing platform that we could access and then ingest, you know, relevant information into the different platforms we want to ingest into, you know, that would work as well. So we don't necessarily have a preconceived notion, but clearly there's going to need to have technology capabilities on both sides to be able to share the information. So to be clear, the bidder is not going to be using CPUC's technology to do all of this work, if that makes sense.
So a general point, highly, highly recommend you follow up all of these. Even if we've answered it, nothing we say is binding. So follow up your questions in writing, especially something like this. If you're trying to clarify a scope of responsibility, this would be the good thing to hit us with and make sure, okay, well, what would that, maybe we'll do an addenda to say, okay, this is actually where the line is. So please, written questions. I mean, that's why we're here, is to answer them, but, you know, follow up with the written questions.
Where do you stand, for instance, that the infrastructure is old, California burns, bottom line, climate change is happening, and $50 million is a drop in the bucket. I mean, it's almost, so on the prior RFP, there was this statement of you may need to use hundreds of linemen. I mean, are you guys open to newer technologies, innovative ways of doing things? I mean, this is not the 1800s anymore.
Yeah, so again, I wasn't necessarily involved in the original one, so I can't speak to the past, but we do need the bidder to articulate how they suggest approaching managing the quantity of work, right, and methods to handle that. Because agreed, and that goes back to the task that talks about prioritization, right? So, you know, we recognize that it's going to, we have to provide some additional scope, but we're looking for the bidder's expertise on providing some direction on how the different approaches that could be used. So certainly, and just to be clear, there is an expectation that there's also just ground pounders out there, right? I mean, we're not going to go fully to aerial surveillance surveillance or observation. But can there be multiple methods to achieve the mission? Absolutely.
Any questions on the phone, chat?
Are there specific certifications required by field inspectors to be qualified?
So I am not an engineer, so let's just be clear about that. And so this is another one that's going to be really important to follow up with a written question to get the specific answer. But I can say yes. I at least learned enough that there's a lot of requirements and training around doing these types of inspections, especially the more sophisticated inspections of the towers and poles.
ArborWorks has left the meeting.
Oh, so I don't think we're prepared to answer the specific certifications in this format, but I'm sure that there are some certifications that are required and I would highly recommend you follow up with a written question.
Yeah, the RFP mentions journeyman linemen with at least 10 years experience. So, but Tony, do you have a chime in on that?
I didn't catch all it. What was the question again?
The question is, are there specific certifications required by field inspectors to be qualified?
Not that I remember. I want to say it was what Michael just talked about. It was just the one certification, and there were questions if there were other, if it's just not the IBEW, and we left that open to see what came in. It goes back to the California requirements is kind of the fallback. What's required in California.
Right. So again, I think we'll follow this up on a written response because it's my understanding that there are some safety trainings that are required of field inspectors to be able to certify that they are trained to do the work safely. But again, I don't know what the names of those certifications are.
So do field inspectors have to have California driver's licenses, or can they hold out-of-state DLs?
Oh, that's a good question. How's it written? Let's just so we don't conflict our answers. How's it written here? I think it said something about driver's license, but I don't know if it said California driver's license.
It just says valid driver's license.
Yeah.
So the RFP doesn't specify.
Yeah, and my understanding, again, we'll follow up with a written response to this, but my understanding
Has left the meeting.
that a driver's license, since states normally share driver's license certification, does not have to be. But we will, I would say we'll follow that up with a written, because when it comes to driving larger vehicles, maybe there is some requirement there. So
yeah, again, please submit the questions in written form. As far as I know, the only California specification is actually the lead structural and lead electrical engineer.
Okay, next question. With the number of personnel required on the ground and expertise required, plus setup and administration does not appear the $15 million will properly cover the required investment.
So that sounds like a statement, not a question. Is there a question in that?
Do you feel the CTC has evaluated the number correctly for the work that has to be performed?
I would say that yes, and the idea is to scope the work to within the funding available.
So it has to have the ability to ramp up, but we'll see what it actually pans out to.
As a follow-up, then, can you talk about the liability that the contractor would take on if, $30 million is needed to cover the whole map, and we only prioritize half. Something happens in the other half. How much liability flows down to the contractor to say, well, you didn't inspect this, you called it low priority. There's lawsuits everywhere about bonfires.
The contract does have an unlimited liability clause in it, so ties into what you're saying.
Concerning?
Yeah.
Yeah, I honestly don't have the expertise to answer that question. I'll need to bring that back to our legal team and contracts team.
Write it, send it in.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Phones are open.
Make your pledge.
I think the question of liability is just really an excellent topic. I mean, this is a hot potato.
Yeah.
And I think $15 million, once again, don't go really far. Just to make a point there.
Yeah. No, we'll get definitely, I think I agree with you. That's a really good question. So we'll definitely do some research on that and get more clarity for you guys.
I guess I'll ask this question again. It really goes back to the qualified professional inspectors, engineers, and certified IBEW journeyman linemen. I'm assuming the IBEW has not claimed a jurisdiction specific to this contract at this time, right? So to your point, we could use alternative resources and not necessarily have to call down to local 1245 to get hands out of the hall.
Again, I'll need to do, it sounds like, Tony, do you have an answer to that? Sounds like you maybe are more familiar with that than I am.
I can't remember exactly. I know that kind of question came up during the last RFP. I have to go back and see what the response was. I think we left it open, but I want to say there were one or two that were asked in the question that California doesn't accept, but I can't remember what they were.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll follow up. Yep.
Be sure to write them down and send them in so we don't miss anything.
And the due date again for the submission is December 13th, correct? For the written questions?
The due date for questions is the 6th.
Oh, the 6th, okay.
So
Sorry, our responses are the 13th.
We're aiming to answer on the 13th.
Got it, okay.
You've got a little over a week to mull it up. Well, Thanksgiving.
Next week.
So you've got a week.
Yeah. Any other questions? Any other questions on the phone? Give an hour back to your day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. For the turkey.
Yeah, try and get out of back home before the rain comes.
Traffic.
All right. Yeah, I was going to say, well, thank you all for coming and for your interest. We look forward to being able to see the bids.
Going once, going twice. Adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John McKelly.
Has left the meeting. Has left the meeting. A participant 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 has